Amid the splendor of Elizabethan England, Queen Elizabeth I emerged as a symbol of power, intelligence, and the carefully crafted aura of monarchy. Her persona was deliberately constructed, the eternal virgin queen, a champion of the arts, and the divine representation of national pride. History recalls her glittering court, the crushing of the Spanish Armada, and England's rise as a dominant Protestant force. Yet behind this grandeur, beneath the pearls, silks, and powdered grace, was a ruler shaped by fear, vanity, and an unrelenting obsession with controlling how she was perceived. In an age when cleanliness was guided more by ritual than by science, Queen Elizabeth I's hygiene practices were, by today's standards, remarkably unusual. They reflected not only the beliefs of her time, but also her conscious effort to project a carefully managed political image. In a world where monarchs were expected to seem almost beyond human, Elizabeth maintained a body untouched by both water and time. Today, we explore 5 of the strangest and most revealing hygiene customs tied to Elizabeth I, each one showing the extreme lengths she went to in order to preserve her legend, even as her body began to fail her. Chapter 1. The Sugar Obsession. Elizabeth's glittering court brimmed with poetry, wit, and grandeur, yet one of her greatest indulgences carried a bitter irony: her love of sugar. In an age when refined sugar was a rare luxury, stored under lock and key and valued like precious gems, the Queen consumed it with unrestrained passion. She delighted in candied violets, sugar-coated marzipan, preserved fruits, and an endless array of lavish sweets presented at her table. To Elizabeth, possessing sugar was akin to possessing power itself, and she ate it as though she were feasting on England's growing prosperity. But dental care in the 16th century was crude at best and dangerously misguided at worst. The Queen is said to have brushed her teeth with a sweet paste made from sugar and herbs, a method that quickened rather than prevented decay. Combined with abrasive powders, the sugar eroded her enamel and left her teeth vulnerable to rot. By the 1590s, foreign envoys observed that Elizabeth's teeth had blackened, with several already lost. The herbalist John Gerard recorded that her breath was so offensive it unsettled those who stood near her. Some even remarked that her speech grew difficult to follow because of the gaps left by missing teeth. Yet the Queen stubbornly resisted the extractions her doctors recommended, dreading the agony of the procedure. In one extraordinary case, a courtier volunteered to have a tooth pulled in her presence, simply to demonstrate that the ordeal could be endured. Stranger still was the influence of her declining smile. Ladies of the court began darkening their own teeth with soot or charcoal to imitate the Queen's appearance. Blackened teeth became less a mark of beauty than a sign of status, a way to reflect both wealth and loyalty to the monarch. In Tudor England's rigid hierarchy, even visible decay could be considered enviable, so long as it mirrored the Queen's. Chapter 2. The Fear of Bathing. One of the most famous lines linked to Queen Elizabeth I is, "I bathe once a month, whether I need it or not." Though historians still question its authenticity, the phrase perfectly reflects the mindset of an age that saw water less as a source of cleanliness and more as a danger. Regular bathing was thought to invite sickness, upset the balance of the body's humors, and expose one to harmful air, or miasma, believed to spread disease. For Elizabeth, immersion in water was not a daily routine, but something to be avoided. Instead, she adhered to a strict regimen of changing her linen shifts, the undergarments worn closest to the skin, often several times a day. These garments were believed to absorb impurities and maintain bodily cleanliness through fabric contact rather than soap and water. To those who lived in her time, Elizabeth's habits were not just acceptable, they were praised. Rather than turning to soap and water, she favored rose water, vinegar rinses, and elaborate herbal concoctions prepared by her apothecaries. These mixtures were carefully dabbed on her skin by attendants, meant to refresh her and act as a safeguard in a world without running water. Such practices were considered the most reliable and refined way of maintaining dignity. After all, her palaces had no plumbing, and whenever bathing did occur, it was a complicated production. Wooden tubs had to be filled with heated water carried by hand, and no fewer than 3 attendants were required to prepare the scene. The process was so demanding that a full bath became a rare indulgence, treated with the same ceremony and care as a royal coronation. Even so, Elizabeth was still considered clean by the expectations of her era. She possessed hundreds of gowns, surrounded herself with perfumed gloves and embroidered handkerchiefs, and insisted on a flawless outward appearance. But her cleanliness was not rooted in true sanitation. It was crafted through careful illusion. Her avoidance of bathing was not laziness or neglect. Rather, it was deliberate. To immerse herself in water was to risk unraveling the carefully constructed image she projected, a sovereign untouched by the vulnerabilities of the flesh. Chapter 3. The Painted Mask. Elizabeth's face remains one of the most iconic in history, pale, unblemished, and almost ghost-like. Yet her appearance was not simply the work of cosmetics. It was a calculated political statement. In a time when pale skin symbolized nobility and divine favor, the Queen relied heavily on makeup as both a protective shield and a projection of power. Her favored cosmetic was Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar. While it gave her the appearance of flawless skin, it slowly poisoned her, eating away at her flesh and leaving scars and sores. To hide the damage, she applied thicker and thicker layers, becoming trapped in a cycle of concealment. The harm didn't end there. Her lip color was often crafted from cinnabar or vermilion, both containing mercury. This toxin entered her bloodstream, undermined her health, intensified her mood swings, and likely caused neurological issues associated with mercury poisoning. Still, she carried on. Why? Because her face no longer belonged to her alone. It represented the crown itself. Elizabeth wielded her appearance as a weapon of power, using it to command her court, unnerve her enemies, and resist the march of age. She would not allow artists to capture her in natural light. Instead, they were ordered to work from standardized templates, recycling the same idealized features over and over. By her later years, her face had become little more than a fragile mask, reportedly so delicate that a touch could cause it to crumble. Historians still argue whether she understood just how poisonous her cosmetics were, but one fact is undeniable. She believed her image had to endure, even as her body weakened beneath the paint. She rarely washed her face, for doing so would strip away not just the layers of lead and powder, but the carefully constructed illusion of Gloriana, the untouchable Virgin Queen. Chapter 4. The Problem of Waste. Beneath the lavish tapestries and gilded ceilings of Elizabethan palaces lay a far less glamorous reality. There was no plumbing. Despite her royal stature, Queen Elizabeth I lived in conditions closer to the Middle Ages than the modern world. Residences such as Hampton Court and Richmond Palace lacked toilets, sewage systems, and running water. Human waste was managed through primitive methods that had barely advanced for centuries. The Queen's personal toilet, known as a close stool, was essentially a cushioned chair with a hole in the seat and a ceramic pot positioned beneath. This chamber pot had to be emptied, washed, and scented several times a day. And surprisingly, the task did not fall to lowly servants, but to one of the most trusted figures at court, the Groom of the Stool. Despite its title, the Groom of the Stool was no ordinary servant. The role was filled by a nobleman of considerable rank, selected for his loyalty and discretion. He had unparalleled access to the Queen in her most private moments, assisting not only with matters of hygiene and dressing, but even with confidential political conversations. To be named Groom of the Stool was not degrading. It was a coveted position of trust and influence. Outside of the Queen's chamber, however, the handling of waste was far less dignified. The entire palace relied on a crude system of chamber pots and cesspits. Servants, often called gong farmers or night soil men, were charged with the grim task of hauling away the filth under the cover of night. They carried heavy buckets through cramped hallways, downstairs, and across courtyards, eventually dumping the contents into pits or trenches designated for waste disposal. These cesspits, sometimes situated just outside the palace walls or even beneath certain chambers, were foul-smelling, overflowing, and breeding grounds for disease. The stench of court life was an ever-present burden. To counter the odor, attendants scattered herbs such as lavender, rosemary, and sweet marjoram across the floors, or burned them as incense. Floors were also covered with rushes soaked in oils to create a more pleasant scent. But because these rushes were rarely replaced, layers of filth, hair, food scraps, dirt, and worse, collected beneath them, festering in the shadows of luxury. Even the Queen's travels were carefully planned to escape the stench. Elizabeth moved often between royal residences, not only for matters of state, but also to avoid the inevitable accumulation of filth. Without plumbing, no palace, no matter how lavish, could remain fresh for long. The longer the court lingered in one place, the worse the odor and the greater the health risks became. Elizabeth's court was a study in contradictions, perfumes covering decay, velvet-lined chairs concealing chamber pots, and the most powerful woman in the realm forced to coexist with the inescapable smell of humanity. Chapter 5. Perfumed Illusion. To truly grasp Queen Elizabeth I's hygiene practices, one must first recognize her obsession with control. Every detail of her body, from the powdered mask on her face to the gloves on her hands, was less about beauty and more about authority. Nowhere was this control more visible than in her refusal to bathe. In Tudor England, water was not just inconvenient, it was intimate. Immersing oneself meant exposing the body, softening the skin, and risking both illness and vulnerability. For Elizabeth, who had witnessed women, including her own mother, Anne Boleyn, fall victim to weakness, the risk of appearing fragile was something she simply could not allow. Rather than washing with water, Elizabeth cloaked herself daily in a ritual of fragrant defenses. Her attendants prepared custom blends in the palace still rooms: lavender, rose, orris root, cloves, and rosemary, steeped in vinegar or spirits. These mixtures weren't intended to scrub away dirt, but to veil odors and uphold her untouchable presence. Each morning, a touch of rose water on her wrists, a light mist behind her ears, and the Queen drifted through court, trailing not sweat, but a carefully crafted aura. She carried pomanders, ornate, orb-shaped charms filled with resins and herbs, nestled in her bodice or dangling from her belt. Whenever foul odors encroached, she raised one delicately to her nose, inhaling the curated purity she demanded. These rituals were more than practical, they were symbolic. Scents marked her separation from the common world, where cleanliness was pursued with soap and water. For Elizabeth, fragrance was not merely preference, but protection, a barrier between sovereign and subject. Her wardrobe was also part of this sensory performance. Gloves were steeped in perfume, handkerchiefs embroidered and saturated with oils, and her gowns, heavy and layered, both concealed the body and preserved its aroma. She even gifted perfumed gloves to select courtiers, allowing them to carry a trace of her essence, while the source remained untouchable. Hair washing was unthinkable. Instead, her natural hair, often fragile from age and poisoned by cosmetics, was hidden beneath elaborate wigs. These wigs were powdered, stiffened with sugar water or egg whites, and delicately perfumed, styled to perfection to maintain the illusion of timeless grandeur. Yet beneath the layers of lavender and powder, time left its mark. Years of toxic cosmetics had weakened her skin, leaving it delicate, scarred, and unable to bear touch. Whispers spread of open sores and peeling patches, but Elizabeth clung to her rituals all the more fiercely, intensifying them rather than letting go. With age came secrecy and suspicion. She refused to allow portraits unless they followed strict instructions. No wrinkles, no blemishes, no trace of decay. Mirrors vanished from her chambers, banished from sight. Some even claimed she kept a servant whose only duty was to discreetly dust her shoulders with powder, ensuring her image remained flawless at all times. The mask of monarchy could never slip, not even in her solitude. Bathing, for Elizabeth, was not neglected out of laziness or ignorance. It was deliberately avoided because it carried too much truth. Immersion in water would expose her body's frailty, strip away the protective powder, and shatter the carefully maintained illusion. A bath risked reminding the world, and herself, that she was mortal. Elizabeth had spent her reign convincing all that she was something more. In her later years, she even carried a perfumed walking stick, which she would lift gracefully when passing courtiers, whose odor was overwhelming. This gesture was more than avoidance. It was theater, a silent signal of distance, a reminder of the divide between monarch and subject. Her body was no longer private, it belonged to the crown. In her world, cleanliness was never truly about health. It was about performance, about image. And for Elizabeth, image was everything. Queen Elizabeth I endures as one of history's most legendary monarchs, not because she embodied purity, but because she mastered illusion. Her approach to hygiene was never careless or accidental. It was a carefully calculated ritual, born from a culture that equated purity with stillness, discipline with control, and image with power. To bathe too often was to risk washing away the mask she had so meticulously built, and Elizabeth would never allow that to happen. Instead, she powdered, perfumed, and performed, turning herself into something greater than a woman, an untouchable icon. Perhaps not clean in the modern sense, but unforgettable all the same. In Elizabeth's court, cleanliness was never truly about soap or water. It was about survival and about the enduring strength of an image that outlived her body.